Peace and love. What's happening, y'all? This is Stacy Patrice. I am here for our Sunday Soul Healing Set saying thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for being here. Every Sunday, I take over the Rebuild Foundation channel and I give myself an opportunity to really and truly engage in these truth talks with our community and allow you all the space to engage with others in the community on this topic, around this topic. I provide the space for this weekly because I think it's important. I think that us being in the world who we are and allowing that to brilliantly shine is deeply connected to our own consciousness and how we see ourselves. And so this is what we do on Sundays at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you all for joining. I am Stacy Patrice at Soul Yogini SP here on Instagram. And if you were with me in August, we had an entire month talking about inner self-work, talking about, how do we explore and embody and become who it is that we want to be. And so this month I decided that we would center our ideas around self in a way that really helps us to bolster and understand not only what's going on with us, but what's going on with other people. I think it's so critically important to just understand that a lot of what we think about ourselves, unfortunately, is coming from other people's ideas of who we are and other people's concepts and behaviors. And the people who are choosing these concepts and behaviors are not necessarily doing their own self-identifying, their own self-concept in broad daylight, right? We're seeing it through their behaviors, and they may be calling it one thing and we may be calling it another. But enough about that. We need to really look at who we are and what it is we're doing so that other people's concepts are not so influential, so that other people's concepts are not dictating the quality of our lives and how we're able to move and thrive. And so that's what we're talking about. And so today I'm going to start with this conversation about the self-concept and about self-worth and how those two concepts really do dictate what we're feeling. And I believe it's important to talk about because if you think about all of the different movements that are happening now, and there are a ton of them, the different movements, the different ways in which humanity is expressing what's important, what we feel, what we're missing, what somebody's not doing, what we haven't gotten, what we'd like to get. These are expressions of self. In these expressions of self, they affect multiple people. So it's not as if we focus on self, somehow the rest of the population is ignored. It's not true. Our focus on self actually helps us to be better, stronger signals in the collective. And so when we have everyone being this strong signal of self, then the collective looks better, the collective shines. And we have a differing of opinions. We have a synergy and a chemistry when we know we're all coming from a rooted place. And some people might say this is idealism. It's like, it's no way we're all going to be the same. Actually, I'm saying the opposite. We're not going to be the same. We're going to be individuals. And being individuals does include being so certain and so true about what it is you know about yourself. And whether that is sharing it with others or whether that is working on it in solitude, those are equally necessary actions. And they do help the collective to thrive. And we're at different places at different times, right? We're not all growing and thriving from the same place. And we're definitely not all having the same ideas or ideals about where we're headed. And so I think at this time, in this particular juncture, this was on my heart all week to start September with. So happy September, welcome, welcome. Again, this is Soul Healing Satsang, and let's just get started. One of the rules here, if you are not aware, is you are asked and encouraged to engage in the comments at all times. This is a conversation. This is not a dictatorship. I am not here giving ideas about who you are and what you are without you having some say in what that is for you. And so the important and critical piece of this is to be able to understand that this is just a model. What we're talking about is a model of truth that you can voyage with us in for the next hour here and be able to see yourself in it, be able to see where am I and what's being said, what do I feel about what's being said. And this really does help to shape self. This really does help us to understand through the mirrors of each other where we are and how we feel about what's happening. So again, thank you for tuning in. And I'll start with the idea that came to me. So self-concept, I want to start by just differentiating what I'm speaking from when I speak of self-concept and self-worth. So when I speak of self-concept, I'm speaking of the way in which we gather ourselves and understand ourselves in the way that we'll behave and present to the world. Self-worth is the way in which we gather ourselves and have an understanding of who that self is. And that may or may not be presented to the world at the onset of that understanding, okay? So when you are first figuring out who you are and what you're doing in this world, it can be very fuzzy, right? And I think even as adults, we can all agree that it's sometimes challenging to know how that will be received by others. And we're in a space now that we're starting to become more bold and more courageous about what that self-worth looks like, about what that concept looks like. And I think that we have to understand first, inside of anything that's going on, if you are there, there is you, right? If there is anything going on, before there's any issues, any problems, there is a self. And there are multiple selves, right? Multiple people who are selves. And we are responsible for spending time with that person. However we identify that person, we're responsible for knowing, advocating for, stepping up, demonstrating as that person. And so that doesn't necessarily alter whether people accept it or whether they don't. It doesn't alter whether people love it or don't, right? This is the kind of trial that we go through in getting this self-concept together. So self-concept is what other people understand about you, is what they see from you, because it relates to your behaviors, your behavioral patterns, how you move in the world. And so I'm saying that the root of that self-concept would be best originated from the idea of self-worth. So what is self-worth? You can start by just naming in the comments if you have an idea what self-worth is, just as a definition, not necessarily your definition of self-worth, but if you have for yourself, but if you have a general like concept definition you'd like to share, go ahead and drop that in the comments. I'll get to those in a minute so that you're a part of this ongoing conversation out loud. And I just want to start by saying, I'll share a story. I'll share a quick story because I know this is part of it. And a lot of times when we share stories, others are riding with us in these stories, hoping to hear themselves or understand something about someone else that maybe they didn't understand before. So feel free to also do that in the comments. And I'll say this, in a coming of age, you know, you come into this world, this bright, beaming soul that is soaking up everything in a moment's notice, soaking it all up, soaking in information, attitudes, expressions, beliefs, energies, teachings. You're soaking up all of the other people who are around you, right? Which is why sometimes people say there's a big difference between nature and nurture, like who you came here to be and who you became because of who you are around. Very, very different sometimes, right? And also some of that nature can be influenced by the nurture, where it actually comes back around full circle and helps you to be who you came here to be, because those are the people who are responsible for helping you to get there, right? And we won't get too deep into that today. But I'll say this, the idea of becoming, which I talked about in August, this idea that who we are has something to say, who we are has something to do, and who we are has somewhere to be. And if we are constantly distracted by what that sounds like and looks like with others, we sometimes get a case of mistaken identity and begin to forget about who it is we came here to be and what we have to do. And I think in this particular time, this is almost widespread at this point. It is rampant, you know, that you can see that people are forgetting what this is about. People are forgetting it, getting caught up in these individual systems, getting caught up in these individual opinions, getting caught up in what people have to say online about someone else, getting very, very entrenched in these values, which is why myself and many of you here probably are in some sort of spiritual practice, some sort of centering and deepening into self, so that you don't become subject to being caught up into these particular things that at the end of the day may or may not have anything to do with how you present yourself in the world. And I'm saying that because I think it's almost seductive to believe that we have to form ourselves to what the world is. We've stopped as a collective believing that the world is formed from who we are, that it is us responding and reacting to the world and the climate, whether, that's social climate, political climate, cultural climate, that we are just reacting to that and forgetting that something was here before those particular climates were even enacted upon us, right? This is something to believe in, to know that it exists. And I call this the sacred space. This is the space that nobody can touch. This is the space that you are responsible for keeping and guarding as important and as real. And when we're talking about the sacred space, that gets really tricky for some people, because the sacred space is actually not something that we're accustomed to talking about and being with and being in. So this concept of self-worth comes from understanding all of the parameters of that sacred space, not just what you can do for others, not just your achievements in life, not just what your value is at your job, not just what your value is in your relationship or to your parents or to your family, that there is a stronger bolstering of self that has to come from within, that really does radiate beyond what the circumstances and environment dictate. And it is our job to thrust and insert that aspect of ourselves into the dynamic picture. And it's also important in this concept of self and self-worth, it's also important to realize that we don't have to limit that to just one definition of self. That's the most common thing that we do, is we feel when we define something, it has to be narrow and tight. And so then people will understand it. Is it our responsibility to have everyone understand who and what we are from the onset? Drop your answer in the comments. Is it our responsibility that everyone has to understand who and what we are at the onset? If there is no investment, correlation, synergy, conversation, communication, connection happening, is it really necessary that these people understand who we are? And why are we spending so much time evaluating to others what it is that is our own worth? So I'll go back to the story I was going to tell. I have a beautiful fascination with celebrity culture. Not because, thanks, Rare Mocha, I appreciate it. Nope, that was our answer. I have a fascination with celebrity culture because it shows me so much about who we are as humanity, in terms of what we expect of people, what we believe we are privy to, what we think about people, how we talk about people. There is such a disparaging attitude towards celebrities when they don't represent us the way we want to be represented. And I'm saying this in general, not specific to individuals, but in general, there's typically a very disparaging energy towards people who are in a position of illumination, which is why we call them celebrities and stars. They are in the light. People who are given the highest of accolades, achievements, and financial abundance by our societal culture. People who now have a different status that transcends a previous identity. And people who are considered and deemed to be worthy, a lot of times not only by fans and family, but by government and laws and a lot of different things that affect the rest of us differently, right? And so what I notice is that the people who don't see themselves as celebrities or have not been verified by culture as celebrities don't always feel the same importance and the same kind of illumination on their own lives. And what I would say is that there is something very intricate to see in this, that when we look at celebrities, they are illuminated, but that doesn't mean they've illuminated the self. We think that because they're in front of us that they've illuminated the self. That is absolutely not always true. When it comes to ourselves, we have the opportunity to illuminate the self, not in front of everybody, not with cameras and paparazzi and everybody watching, not with blogs reporting on your every move. And a lot of us bypass it and won't even do it. They won't even do it. So when we look at this, kind of idea of how we illuminate ourselves, we have to think about, well, what is this going to yield me in the end? Why do I need to do self-work? Why do I need to do inner work? Why is it so important that I spend time with my sacred self, Stacey? What is this about? It is about this moment in this time. I've been saying this for years, but now we see the external circumstances very much reflecting what this is about. When people are not in tune with what makes them well, we have a society and a collective culture of sickness. This doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be a pandemic. It can be all of the other pandemics that we didn't call a pandemic before we got this pandemic. This idea that there is a sickness amongst us, that there is a toxicity amongst us. And in order to be healthy and eradicate it, we have to begin looking at the things at the root cause of the sickness. And a lot of the root cause of the sickness comes from our consciousness. If we don't have the consciousness that connects us to the truth, then what we begin to do is start to adopt and get nurtured by other people's ideas and concepts of what all of this is and what all of this means. This is like having a very strong spiritual inclination that speaks out and says, who I am and what it is that I am doing is so critically important that I have to remind myself and stay in tune and focus with what that rhythm and energy is. Because when I tap into that, it allows me to live the life that I envision. It allows me to be walking in the steps that I already know are the ones to walk in. It allows me to be a strong signal for other strong signals so that we can collaborate, be creative together, create families together, live together, and be in a world that represents our inner selves. And seeing what we're doing instead is a lot of people are kind of killing off the inner self because it doesn't fit in with the culture. They're kind of quieting the inner self because it's not a part of what everyone else is talking about. They're kind of subbing the inner self because it's not popular. It doesn't get people to the top tiers all the time. And what I'm saying is that knowing who you are is the top tier. It is the top tier. It's not something that someone else can verify for you. But how you show up and represent that in the world, your self-concept that you project to the world, is a centering of what that self-worth is for you internally when no one else is around, if that makes sense, right? And so right now, the biggest thing that most of us are charged with that we can do, that we can feel completely confident and grabbing a hold of and having as our foundation and our base, is understanding who we are. This is a cliche. People say it all the time. You got to know who you are, and you get this vision and live your life. And it's been said so many times, but how many times has it been thoroughly done? And that's what we're looking at here for September. Can we get to the thorough aspect of doing what we know we need to do? Can we eliminate our distractions? And can we touch into that cornerstone of self? And I call that the soul, that reminds us that everything is already ordered as it should be. Everything is already inherently divine. We're not looking for that. We are experiencing that. We're constantly bumping into that, right? And so I'll start by saying one of the things that we're going to be talking about over this month of September, whether it's self-esteem, self-regard, self-respect, self-integrity, self-compassion, all of these different arms of self. But I want us to really remember that the larger conversation is about centering ourselves in this soul work, in our soul worth, centering ourselves, okay? So when we talk about knowing your worth, I want to use society, ourselves, and our families for these upcoming conversations and in today's exploration of self-worth. So I want you to think about yourself as part of a family, and whichever family that is, whether it's, your family of origin, your circle of friends, the family you've created, your spiritual family. And then I also want you to think about yourself and inside of that family as a larger part of society. As we look at those different places, so first self, then the immediate circle that surrounds self, and then the larger circle that includes self. We have to be more certain about that first definition in order to attract the people who are surrounding self, that they be the people that allow us and give us space to carry out our purpose. And then that larger are like the people that we may impact with our centering of self, right? And so I want you to think about this. You as an individual, let's say you have no idea what you're supposed to be doing on this planet right now. Let's just say it. Let's just say it, y'all, because things are shifting and we have to normalize that conversation. Because a lot of times what people thought they were going to be doing, they're looking at this time now and they're like, this is not it. And they're creating a self around that. So I want to normalize the idea that, let's just say you have no idea what it is. Let's say you're starting fresh and you're saying, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or how I'm supposed to be doing it, but I know there's something and I'm trying to get a sense of it. So help me out with this today. All right. So if this is where your starting point is or anywhere near it even, Let's start by thinking about, how do you get what you know and who you are to be expressed in the world, which is where we left in August. How do you become the expression of that? This is understanding self. I become the expression of who I am when I understand all that I'm made of, how I feel about things, which things excel me and which things don't. So when we're talking about self-worth, the first thing to pay attention to is what contracts you. What is contracting to who you are and into your life as you know it, and trust it. Don't question it. Don't question whether it's valid. Don't question whether other people have had that experience. You can start, if you're using a journal, with this question, or you can engage in the comments with this question. What is contracting to you as you know it? Because this will help you to start to understand who you are, what your fears are. What are the things that you shouldn't really touch? What are the things that need healing? What are the things that contract you? And when I say contracting you, you identify whether your self-worth is on par or not, per my notes that I wrote today, whether you live in a contracted state, okay? So a lot of us possibly can say very easily that living in this world means that we are most of the time living in a contracted state. Now, that's the more social, societal aspect of it, right? We're gonna walk it back. In your family, and your friends, and your alliances, your partnerships, the people who are close and surround you, do you feel that you are in a contracted state around these people? And then what is that contracted state? What are the things you experience that let you know something's off, something's not right? I'm not really my freest self. I'm not able to say and feel the things that I would be able to when I'm around this group of people, right? So in a larger sense, community, society, in a larger sense, you know, we have several movements right now that are all speaking to the contracted states in which people believe are affecting millions of us, right? Whether that is Black Lives Matter, whether that is Me Too, whether that is, you know, the movement of choice on any level. You know, we are looking at several movements that are saying, I don't want to live in a contracted state. I reject the notion of living in a contracted state. Contraction can be depression, repression, oppression, suppression, right? So anything that's pressing on you, anything that's keeping you down, pushing you aside, quieting your voice, making you feel less than. These are the kind of things that are indicative of living in a contracted state. And when you're living in a contracted state, how can your self-worth feel great? How can your self-worth be strong? You have to bolster it. This is the resistance. This is, if there is a contracted state happening, what do I need to do so that I don't believe the hype that I am a contracted being? What is it that I need to do so that I am not telling myself that I am supposed to function properly in contraction? What is it that you do to realize yourself and express yourself as an expansive being, not a contracted one? And this is so important because to me, I understand it as the roots of mental health. I understand it as the roots of living in a toxic society. I understand it as a lot of the bickering and arguing about what's right, what's wrong, who did this, who's the accuser, who's the victim, who's the perpetrator. A lot of this is about not understanding from space that you can't buy into the contracted state. The contracted state is not necessarily the state that you thrive in. So if there is something you don't thrive in, what do you do? Do you stay in it? Do you remain in it? Do you say, this is my environment, oh well? Or do you do something to expand, bust out of it, and be something different that other people feel contracted can say, hey, something's different over there. Let me follow that light, right? That's how important it is to be you. That's how important it is to be your authentic self, because other people are sparked by that. So first, we're talking about that. If you live in a contracted state, identify those things, write those things down. You can crumble them up or burn them later, but you need to see for yourself, or either say them, or let the thoughts come up, meditate on it. What are the things that help you to feel expansive, that address you pulling yourself out of the contracted state? This, so many times, it's hard for people to identify, because being expansive is a courageous act in a contracted state, right? In a contracted society. Being expansive, being someone who's saying, I see beyond this. Being someone who's saying, I don't buy this. I don't belong here. I don't subscribe to these philosophies. Definitely means that you're doing something courageous. Whether you're doing it with a group of people or solo, doesn't matter. You're doing something courageous. Whether you do it out loud for others to see or it's a part of your own homework and gathering up your self-worth, doesn't matter. It is all courageous work. And the reason it's courageous is because it's saying, I don't accept that. And using your inherent birthrights to find your way out of it. All right. Other people are our mirrors that help to create our self-concept. But what we want to do is focus on injecting that self-worth into the self-concept, not just about how you behave to others, but really about how you understand your full picture to represent in this life. And what this simply means is if you are someone who knows that you are, have, and represent something good, what level do you hold that at? Right? And if we're not using good or bad or right or wrong, if you have something divine and of value, what level do you hold that? What level do you raise that up? Can you raise yourself up to celebrity status? That's what I'm saying. Not just the people that are chosen to illuminate are in the spotlight. Can you raise yourself to the spotlight? Can you raise yourself to a status where what other people sense about you is not as strong or as important about what you know about yourself and how you carry yourself in that way? That's what I'm saying here. So when it comes to your self-worth, do you turn to others? And this is a real question to ask yourself. Do you turn to others to give to you? Or do you turn within to give to yourself? This is a habit check. This is a habit check. It's not a call out. It's a habit check for yourself. You don't have to put this in the comments. Just check yourself on this, right? It's easy to wait for someone to promote you, to wait for someone to say you're wonderful, to wait for the compliment, to wait for the admiration, to wait for the audience and the fan base, to wait for all of those things. It's really, really one thing to do that, right? It's another thing to inauthentically go after all those things. I'm going to be obnoxious so I get the compliment. I'll buy followers so I have the fan base. I'll do the things I need to do in order to gather the kind of energy that I want so that I feel good, right? And then there's the reality that yourself is just sitting there waiting on you. It doesn't even need all of that. It's just waiting on you to say, you're it. This is it. This is how we do this. You know, that you are everything that you need in this life to continue. And then everything else is just icing on top. But if there's a fracture or there's a shattered sense of self, this is exceptionally challenging. We see people with shattered sense of self in the forefront. And then when they say things, it's like we think for a minute like, wait, that can't be right. And then when more people do it with them, then we kind of tend to go along with it. And it's like, no. Again, get solid in that definition, because your sense of self and your sense of self-worth may not agree with what the masses are doing. And most times it doesn't, because how can it agree with the masses? It's an individual sense of self, okay? So how do you identify this low self-worth? Yes, you identify it when you live in a contracted state. That was the first one. And then there's the mistaken identity. There's the mask before we were all required to wear masks. There's the idea that your representative or your acknowledgement of self has not occurred yet, that you have not acknowledged what your identity is, your true identity. This doesn't mean you always have to announce it. Again, everyone's not privy to all information at all times. So sometimes you have to get it for yourself before you make an announcement, before you share it with others. And so then the question begins, are you in a space of mistaken identity? Do you know exactly who it is that you are? And if the answer is no, that's fine. If the answer is yes, that's fine. But this is a starting point if the answer is no. If the answer is yes, continue building that and developing that. It's a lifelong kind of process. And the more you understand yourself, the more you can impart that into your life as life moves on. Because sometimes we think of self as a destination or arrival point, but your sense of self as a child or as a baby versus what you know about yourself now or retroactively or retrospectively is not going to always be the same. So we have to understand people at different ages have different identities of self, because there are certain patterns. We think of, maybe in psychology and education, how they tell us, 7 years is the developmental cycle. Oh, trust me, it's way longer than that. They know 7 years. It goes on 4 decades. You are still, that's why people say people in their 50s are having a midlife crisis. It's not a midlife crisis. It's a different developmental point. It's a different point where they start to question if the discipline that they've had is still necessary for what they're going to do next. If you're retired, you don't have to be the same person you were when you were working all the time. So it's like we have to look at society and our social culture like this. We have to look at it as a wave or various waves, not just one dot that says, okay, get here. And then when I'm here, I'm done. It is always evolving. But what is the core central piece that helps it to evolve is the question. And that's what we're talking about with self-worth. All right. Here are some ways in which low self-worth is camouflaged. I'm just going to throw them out here. Okay. And these are not all inclusive because there are probably a multitude of ways. But here are some of the ways that I think our culture camouflages low self-worth. Through achievements and validation. If I can get, this many things, or I can do this, then I'll be somebody. If I can find myself amongst this circle of clout, then I'll be seen as somebody. I'll have the status I've always needed and always wanted. If I allow myself to pretend and fake it till I make it to be like these people, then when these people get on my team, then I'll have all the success I want, right? So that achievement and validation piece. When I get my blue check on Instagram, I'll really be somebody. Hey, you're somebody now. And you could be somebody with a blue check, right? But it's this idea that all of these things that culminate into this bigger thing is when you'll finally feel like yourself. But that is an indication of low self-worth that's camouflage. I think our social culture camouflages through that. Excessive drug use and alcohol. Man, this is a camouflage. It doesn't mean you have low self-worth. It could mean that something that causes low self-worth you don't want to deal with, right? So it's not that excessive use or abuse with alcohol and drugs means you have low self-worth. It could be that you're trying to figure out something. And in the meantime, it's just too much to show up with that burden, with that chip, with that thing, carrying it with you everywhere you go, right? And so we start to mask or in some way numb that identity down, right? And so most people don't see that as a camouflage because some people are incredibly strong, incredibly powerful in their use. But that's why I'm gonna use and qualify and say excessive, because I think that excess means that there's something going on and it tips a person to a point where the self-care and the self-respect isn't there. And so I'll say excessive. People pleasing in excess. Y'all, can we talk about this? Sometimes our people pleasing can go too far, where we start to denote and deny the parts of ourselves that are already worth being loved. And we start to exploit the idea of being loved into this behavior that draws more people in who need it that don't return it, right? Sometimes people pleasing can be a red flag indicator that the self-worth is low, that I need love, so I'll just give it to anybody as long as I can feel it back, as long as I can feel I am somebody, I contribute something, or I am in some way included in this love thing. I'll continue to do things to please people so that I get the compliments and I get, those things. And so this can sometimes be a sign of so low self-worth, not because these people aren't lovable, but because maybe they don't see themselves that way. They don't understand how special what they have is and what they give is. And so it ends up being other people being in the spotlight and being uplifted when they're the ones with the capacity and the generosity to love, right? Isn't that weird how that happens? Critics of all kinds, public, private, self, others, critics of all kinds. Do we really need critics? I mean, let's just think about this, right? I mean, critics can help us, people can teach us and help us to understand things. But when we get to critics, this is like a badge of honor, of esteem, that you have the power, the usage, and the ability to let others know how they're not it, right? That you have the ability to dismiss others, right? And so this is sometimes a way in which our societal culture kind of camouflages low self-worth. If you think about it, you don't have to really criticize anyone. You can see something and not like it. I think Common says, if I don't like it, I don't like it. That don't mean that I'm hating. It's true. You don't have to actually dismiss something or dismiss someone in order to raise yourself, right? You don't have to be in that space. You can notice something, and often the people who notice things and have a voice become the worst critics because they know that there's that power dynamic with that influence, and they say, oh, I can say something about these people because they deserve my wrath because they're not like us. And it's just bullying on a higher form with possibly money behind it, right? With a solid check behind it. So we have to be careful of, you know, criticism, especially if it's self-criticism. If you criticize yourself harder than everyone else, yo, check that. Put some healing balm on that. Because a lot of times your own idea of who you are is actually worse than how people receive you. Or how people receive you is why you have this idea that you're so much worse than who you are. I think it was a Kanye West lyric where he was talking about how he was making beats, and he was like, I was really having nervous breakdowns. Like, man, are these people that much better than me? Because it's like this idea that somewhere in your functioning, you really don't understand why you keep getting a no. You really don't understand why people keep saying no, thank you, and they don't like it. If your self-worth is strong, you keep going. You don't need their yes. You don't need their validation, right? Because you realize you're going to do what it is you were meant to do. And at some point, people will recognize it or not, but you're going to keep doing it. And only you are the GPS. Your soul is the GPS about how you need to express that, change that, tweak that, make it better, make it louder, make it stronger, right? So then we got to say perfectionism right behind it. Perfectionism and needing approval of others, right? That perfectionism is one of the ways that we often camouflage low self-worth. Because who is worthy enough that you have to be perfect for? That's the question to ask. Who is worthy enough that you have to be perfect for? I'm asking that like, I really want to check all of us on that. Even if we are wonderful, ask yourself when you are caught in that cycle of perfectionism, who is worth more than you that you have to be so perfect for? And then the caveat, the way that we usually, you know, squirm out of that is more me. I'm so perfect. I need to be, I'm worthy enough that I have to be perfect. Not understanding that perfection is as perfection does. That is not something you get from the outside. That it is perfect, that you are who you are and you are in your process how you need to be. It doesn't need an extra layer or a hat or umbrella of perfection on top, right? So when we think about those particular things, hostility, and we're experiencing a lot of it right now. Hostility is a mad sign of low self-worth. Why do you have to be hostile with other people? I check myself on that all the time. When something builds up, I don't have to be hostile. I don't have to be hostile. That means I'm not operating in compassion. I'm operating in frustration. I'm not responding. I'm reacting to what other people do. Why is hostility ever necessary? Some of the greatest changers and movers and makers of our world were hostile with no one. And then we have those that are great change makers that were hostile with everyone. And, you know, very much tyrants, you know. So it's important to just look at this and realize that, you know, you may have to be hostile at certain points and not hostile at other points because you're trying to move through something. And so we're not demonizing any of these behaviors. We're recognizing, acknowledging that these are some of the behaviors that are associated psychologically with low self-worth. That when you have to be hostile, it's like internally you feel it's a power play between you and someone else. And it's essentially giving them the power. If you have to be hostile, you're basically saying to them, you're more important and more valuable than me. And it seems like you're trying to stop me because you have more power, so let me do that. So being hostile is definitely an indicator that there's some maladjusted self-worth in there. And when we can get back to that place of understanding where our worth is, it really does seamlessly address all other misconceptions. Also, being unwilling to look at your past. If you know someone or you are someone who will not go back and get it, who has no Sankofa, will not look at their past, there is usually an insecurity present in who they were back then, who they demonstrated themselves to be. And they don't want that to come into this new idea of who they are. And of course, if you've been with me several Sundays, you know we are about integrating that. That is the soul healing path, is to integrate who you've been into who you are. Because you can't get here without that. It didn't magically appear when you wanted it to. It appeared at the path, at the line of your path. So if you had to go through something to get here, you not only celebrate where you got, but you celebrate your journey. You celebrate that exploration. So I don't care what that is. I don't care if it's something that has brought you shame, if it is something that has made you notorious with other people. It could be any of these things I'm mentioning, where you were camouflaging your own concept of who you were or trying to defend your own concept of who you were at the time. The important thing to remember is that when you start to see these things, these are indicators that there is something present to look at. And I'm not going to just leave you all with these indicators. We're going to move on from this. I have just one more, and that is pessimism. Believing that everything is damned, believing that everything is in some way liable to be unimportant, believing that no matter what it is that is happening, there's always a downside, and that we talk about the downside endlessly. So pessimism is one of those things. It's kind of a resignment. It's kind of giving up. It's kind of saying, I know things look horrible, but you know, they are horrible. And just not refusing to see anything else, which, you know, and some people, that can look really bizarre. You can be like, why would they think that? Why do they think that about themselves? And this is where we have to insert compassion. So if we talked about some of the indicators of low self-worth, let's talk about some of the things we can do to kind of reverse it and give our self-worth a better boost, right? So one of the things you can do at all times is to be more forgiving. And of course, you got to start with yourself, because that's what we're talking about. You have to be more forgiving. And being forgiving with yourself is a beautiful, beautiful step. But it doesn't necessarily work if you only forgive yourself, right? It doesn't mean that forgiveness erases a history. Forgiveness actually marks history. It tells you the moment you decided to stop identifying with the history and you decided to move on in a different concept. So when you are forgiving and you find yourself in a space of reminding yourself like, hey, I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask to go through this. I just asked to get to a place where I can understand what's happening. I'm asking to explore my life as it's meant to be explored. And some of the things that happen along the way are going to look like mistakes and tragedies and missteps. And I will understand them differently at some point through my own work. And when I do, the most important thing for me to do is to forgive all of the feelings and attachments and holding that I was doing to the things that I felt at that time. It's not necessary to continue holding on to things that don't work. You can reference them, they can inspire you, but to hold on to them for dear life as if they are part of your identity is what I'm talking about. It's not necessary to continue doing. Everyone has their own evolutionary path, and at a point you will understand those mirrors to be what they are and do the healing in that area. All right, another thing to do is humanize yourself. This sounds so strange to some people, but humanize yourself means what we talked about a few weeks back. This is like changing your definition of humanity. Maybe how people are behaving, operating, acting, responding is not at all in your wheelhouse of humanity. It does not connect to how you see yourself and how you feel you want to respond. And these are not easy topics to stomach. So for those of you that are sticking in there, good for you. These are not easy topics to stomach. A lot of times people shy away from this part of the work, and that's exactly why I'm talking about it, because it's something that really does change the way that we understand the world. This is not to call anybody out. This is to remind ourselves that there's another option. There are multiple other options. It doesn't mean that we don't see what's happening. It means we are urgent about our response to what's happening. And that's what this is about. So when you start to realize that you rehumanize yourself, it means don't give anybody the position and the power to be able to dehumanize you. And this is an important topic because a lot of times we are asking ourselves how we value others. But I'm saying, question, how do you value yourself when others don't? Dig into that. How do you value yourself when others don't? Because it's more important to remind yourself and to have that self-worth, because you can always return to it, hold on to it, be guided by it. But it's not so well if you never had it. And then other people come into play, dehumanize, change the way they see you, and then it changes the way you see you, right? That's the importance of this. That's how critical it is, because you can always return to it. If you get distracted for a minute, if some people, you know, possibly are not really into what it is that you're into, you always have that North Star. You always have that space to return to, okay? And we're not all in the same space, right? So if we believe in all of these laws, whether it's the laws of the land, whether it's the law of attraction, whether it's karmic law, universal law. There are all these laws that we talk about very freely. But if you believe in those laws, then ask yourself profoundly, who is the person who is responding to the people who believe in those laws? Meaning, what kind of citizen is responding to this? And I'm saying this in all aspects of your life, right? If you believe that what you say and what you think and what you feel can happen, then what are you saying, thinking, and feeling about yourself? And are you the sum total of what you have thought, said, and felt? Or have you adopted what someone else has thought, said, and felt? And that's what we're separating here on this particular satsang, is the difference between your self-identity, how you value yourself, how you center yourself, and then how that self corresponds to others who may or may not be doing the same valuing, centering, and identification. Does that make sense, y'all? I hope this makes sense. All right. And then, of course, you're honoring your life experiences. I think it's very easy to not understand that your life does shape your perception. I think it's easy to, I think a lot of people are looking at what has happened in our lives as we were being, brought up, with our parents and kind of the life we lived as we were brought up. But also I want you to look at these other aspects and think about who listens to you. Identify these. These are exercises for yourself. Who listens to you? Who speaks of you with high regard, whether to you or to others? Where are you included easily and effortlessly? Where are you included without having to prove yourself or trial, that you're just yourself and that is included and respected and honored? Where are you congratulated and celebrated for your accomplishments, for your beingness? Where are you congratulated and celebrated? What achievement did you experience in your adolescence as you were coming up that you realize were key factors that you can be proud of and how you handle yourself now? These could be academic achievements, but they can also be achievements in terms of personality traits, how they came about, things that you did that brought forth certain aspects of yourself. Also, a lot of people, judge and give themselves a barometer of their worth based on how they're able to attract and sustain healthy relationships. And this is something we'll go into in one of these other Sundays, because I do want to get into more about the fragility and the vulnerability and these other ideas. But a lot of times, how we're able to maintain relationships, people do base their self-worth on this. I'm not saying that's proper. I'm saying pay attention to your relationship track. Are you building relationships? Are you able to communicate? Do you advocate for yourself in relationships? Do you let people know who you really are? Do you come in the door as who you are? Or do you allow other people's ideas to kind of take over the relationship space? And again, repress, depress, suppress, your own voice. Also, how often and how regularly you experience unconditional love. So even though I'm saying these things in the affirmative, there are people who are experiencing these things in the negative. And that is why their self-worth is not where they want it to be or where they would hope it would be. It's not something that they've always done or even conscious of, which is why we're talking about it in the satsang. It's this idea that how often you receive unconditional love does blossom you. It does allow you to flower into yourself, because you have this understanding that how much you are loved will enable you to see it through. No matter what happens, how much you are loved will enable you to be the full expression of who you are. And then in addition to that, stressful life events over periods of time. So if you can name, 4 or 5 events that have sustained you in your adulthood, maybe in your childhood or your adolescence, these are things that definitely affect self-worth. You have to be so kind to who you are and just remind yourself that you carry a lot. You carry a lot, right? I'm saying this because as we are here an entire year from, this time last year, I was in Bali. I was on the other side of the world enjoying myself with a conscious collective of, students and friends who were, embarking upon a journey. And I'm saying this to you because you don't have to be perfect to embark on a journey. You don't have to have it all together and understand everything about who you are at once to begin being yourself. You don't have to be at the height of everything you've ever imagined in your ideal form to hold yourself to a sense of self-worth. Self-worth can grow. That's the amazing and beautiful part about self-worth. It can grow. And you are responsible for kind of curating the experience in your life that allows that sacred space to grow. And that's what we're talking about. It's not so much about what other people do to you, what other people do to others. It's about that rebounded adjustment. How do you adjust to what has happened? How do you form not a barrier, because we want things to get in that we love. So we can't close ourselves off because it stops the things that we love from getting in. But how do you adjust to giving yourself space to grow and to flourish in your worth? And some people would say self-worth, self-esteem, same thing. I highlighted a small distinction between the two. I feel like self-esteem is like your persona, how you present yourself to others. But self-worth doesn't require an other to be present. Does that make sense? It is what you have before presenting to an other, right? Now, your self-esteem may allow you to express what your worth is, but I feel like your self-worth is really what you understand. And sometimes we discover it through others, but it doesn't, we reflect on it like, that wasn't right. I shouldn't be doing that, not to myself. The kind of love I have for myself doesn't deserve that kind of, action. But it's really something that we cultivate. And so this was just an intro conversation to what this month is about. If it felt hefty, it might be because it is. It's asking us to stand up and step up and have urgency around who it is that we are to be. It's asking us to use the events of the world to reflect upon what it is that are the events in our lives that have us thinking anything other than being of worthy, multidimensional expression. It's the idea that all of us not just have something to offer, but we all are expressions of the divine. We are all hopefully instruments of the divine. And when we are centered in our spiritual experience and our spiritual understanding, we have the wings to be able to float and to soar into new dimensions. And no manner of attempted clipping of wings can create a disruption in understanding if we have it solid for ourselves. Does that make sense? We have to have it solid for ourselves. It's our job. No one's going to give you your self-worth. You have to demand it. And once you demand it, there's no one that can't give it to you. So when you demand that self-worth, you are met with people who have to respect it or move on. And if we are in that space and we understand that space as being a real thing, not just the ego, not just narcissism overload, but actually being a real thing that we trust and rely upon, then we know that nothing that's for us will ever pass us. We know that the events that we see are conjuring up inspiration and ideas within us to move. We know that the things that hurt us the most are not for us to lay down and lick our wounds, but for us to understand and to heal up whatever is impacted by something that someone else can do. We understand we are being called to a higher vibration by the mishaps that others present. We understand that when we see a lot of our people leaving the planet and moving on, that we are really being called for a new order of humanity. And that doesn't mean that you're responsible for bringing it forth by yourself, but maybe, perhaps, possibly, you are part of it. It means that recognizing an ending is important, and being able to spawn your own new beginnings is important. This is not something that is ceremonious in our lives, especially not here in the United States. It's not a ceremonious thing to have endings and new beginnings marked. It is a spiritual thing because a lot of times there's no rites of passage where there should be. And we have different aspects of ourselves that endure rites of passage all the time, but there's no celebration, no ceremony. And so what people think is that their hard work is for naught, or that if they are in some way doing something, it doesn't matter unless it makes other people money or it's at the top of the food chain in terms of visibility. And I am here to say that who you are and whatever rites of passage you move through are important to not only just your self-concept, but they're important to your soul. They're important that you become someone who has accumulated that experience. So no matter what form you are in, no matter what identity you are expressing, this is something in your repertoire. And I don't think that there's as much of an emphasis on that, which is why I teach and share and guide people with soul healing. It's because you have to heal up whatever it is that disturbs your soul, that offends your soul. You got to heal that up and relinquish the other person's power from you in that way, and derive your own autonomy to be able to express yourself in a way that is worthy for every single one of your risings and every single one of your sunsets. And I think this is worth talking about. This is what September always represents to me. We're here at a weekend in the States that they call Labor Day. And to me, this is the labor of love. This is the labor that all of us have to become devoted to, which is the idea that we have neglected ourselves for too long, and it's showing in such detrimental ways, and people are signing up for it and signing contracts for it every day. And it's not our job to stop them. It's our job to be louder in our love for self, to be more profound in the ways in which we bolster our self-worth and share our expressions of self-worth, and remind ourselves that self-worth does not have a price tag. You cannot be bought. It is not about getting the highest amount of money or the highest amount of accolades or recognition. That self-worth is profoundly about how you build up the value of yourself to yourself. And what you do with that to show to others is precisely on you. You don't need a promotion from outside to your self-worth. When you run into people that say, oh no, do you know what you're doing? You should charge more than that. That's a hint. When you run into people who say, I would never expect you to hang around people like that, that's a hint. Sometimes it's hating, sometimes it's envy, sometimes it's other people not understanding who you are. But a lot of times there are little nudges along the path, and they irritate the crap out of you because you're like, how the nerve of you to say that about me, right? But it's really and truly a nudge from the universe, like, take a look at that. Take a look at that. Are you degrading? Are you minimizing? Are you somehow self-deprecating? Because we're not having that. We're not having that for divinity. We're not having it. And you have to sometimes make those adjustments. So what I would say as a final word on this, before we move into the next topics, because all we're going to be doing is building on self-identity, self-worth, and self-concepts throughout the next couple of Sundays, or 4 total, in September. And as we move on from this introductory topic of self-worth and self-concept, I want to say this to anybody who's listening now or later. I want to say to you, what would the world look like if you really sat strong and tall in your seat of power as the unique being that you are, without a concern of what that may look like to others? Now, I'm not talking about recklessness. Response ability, the ability to respond. What does that look like when you sit in that responsibility of higher value of yourself? It will start to heal up, transform, change, adjust, all kinds of things that you can't even see right now. Because there are blind spots, because the worth is not up. So this is not about recalling trauma. This is not about ignoring trauma. This is about understanding and informing yourself about the effects of things that you've experienced, and finding new ways to bolster yourself above those things. That they are not more powerful than the all of you. That you are pulling yourself up higher, stronger, in full understanding of those things and why they had to happen. Because would you have pulled up if they didn't happen? Would you understand all that you are if none of it was ever used? Dang, y'all gonna make me go all the way there, because I feel such a spirit in saying that. Would you even understand all of who you are if certain things weren't poked at, pressed, and shown in some way? And the answer for a lot of us is no. And that's why we have to integrate. We have to tell people where we've been. for them to understand, hey, I'm not going back there. I've been there already. We have to let people know where we've been is a sacred rite of passage to get to here. And I'll be damned if you take that from me. And so understanding that gives you a different space to move from, and a different cloth to be cut from, and a different understanding of how to be in relationship, how to be in community, how to be with yourself, how to raise children, how to be in partnership. It changes everything. It's a game changer. If your self-worth is not there, then you are picking from an injured space. And if you are picking from an injured space, how could you ever feel whole? How can you ever operate in fullness? That's how critically and urgent and important this is. So I want to thank you all for joining me today for this Soul Healing Satsang. I am Stacey Patrice. StaceyPatrice.com is my site. At Soul Yogini SP is my Instagram handle. I am here every Sunday on the Rebuild Foundation channel, having these satsangs with you, sharing, engaging with you. I know sometimes when you all are quiet, it's not because you don't have anything to say, it's because you're soaking it in and you're looking at your own life. And I appreciate that as much as I do any form of engagement that you could give. So thank you all so much for being here with me today. Next week we return. We talk about the self all this month of September, and we'll go a little bit more. I think we're going to talk about vulnerability next week. And this will span not only what it means on both sides of the coin, but also in relationships and what it means at this time in the world. Thank you all so much. Big love and blessings to you and blessings to you. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much. Peace.